This is the All Things Groenkloof podcast. Charl Collins, Care Manager of the Groenkloof Retirement Care Group, is your host today, alongside producer Annatjie. They are joined by Groenkloof Gardens resident Celeste Wood. This episode explores what residents need to know about palliative care, from the timing to assessing the support of Dr. Corli Marx and Dr. Leana Spies. Let's dive right in.
Good day and welcome to another episode of All Things Groenkloof. Annatjie, good morning.
Good morning, Charl.
It's exciting. Good morning, Celeste. Celeste Wood is our guest today. And obviously on the platform All Things Groenkloof, we discuss elements that might be interesting, but not just interesting, also empowering to our Groenkloof George residents. But even wider than that, we have recently taken note that people even outside of our own community are listening to this. But for us just to start out, I would like to just have a few questions. Celeste, yourself, how long have you been in Groenkloof?
All right. Charl, I moved here in July 2024, so it's just short of 2 years now.
Wow. Okay, well, then you've experienced it. There's nothing more. Okay. And just tell me, from where did you actually move?
I moved from Johannesburg.
Okay.
So a big change.
Yes.
A massive change. A change, of course, from a totally dysfunctioning municipality to a place which is well run. And I think all the community that I'm in all agree with that. I mean, most of the Groenkloofers agree with that. But it's lovely. The transition was very smooth.
And just a quick question. We need to move on, but I'm always keenly interested. Why Groenkloof?
We did look around quite a bit beforehand. We looked at some of the other places, but Groenkloof was the one because it offered everything. And I think this is the sort of resounding view you get all the time. It has everything we wanted from frail care. At that time, my partner was quite ill, so that was one of the most important things. But apart from that, it had a gym facility. It had a dining hall if you wanted it. It has a little restaurant. And the nice thing also is that each little village is almost like a separate suburb. So you know the idea of coming to Overtehuis, which they were their old called in the old days.
I like Afrikaans. I'm keenly impressed.
Was that's a bit of a myth now? It's anything but. So it's really been very easy, the transition.
And you are a resident at the Gardens, and by reputation, the Gardens is a vibrant community.
Absolutely.
So we've had Dawn here that visited with us.
Yeah.
But no, that's marvelous. So our theme for today, we're actually picking up on this whole idea of the care model that we know as palliative care. Now, in our previous recording in the Afrikaans, we had two of our doctors that relatively recently moved to the Southern Cape. And I would just like to pose the question, from that conversation, what was your impression? What is it that the average Groenkloof resident should take note of when it comes to palliative care?
I think there were a lot of things that I didn't know because palliative care has been always quite broad in my mind, and typically I also thought it was perhaps end of life, almost like working in conjunction with hospice. And I think what was very important in my mind was the fact that somebody, by the time of early diagnosis of a terminal illness, they could already call on palliative care, and I think that was such an eye-opener for me, which I don't think everybody knows. I think it's because the field is fairly new as well, palliative care. So, but that to me was a real eye-opener.
I think the definition that stands out to me was that I think Dr. Corli defined it so well when she said that if you pose the question to a treating physician, would you be surprised if you were to hear within the next 12 months that your patient had passed on?
Yes.
And I think that was the sort of the parameter. Yes. When do we decide, and as a treating physician, when do you decide to timeously refer a patient to make use of that? And I think it's good that we take note of that, because I think, even in our community, it's an older growing community. And for us to be able to give that advice, that's,
Absolutely.
And then in terms of the what stood out with regard to the two doctors, were you able to form an impression? Because
yes, it was interesting what they said, that they were both obviously young doctors, and they did their Zuma year, which is their community year, at various hospitals. And I think I remember the one was at Kimberley Hospital. But both of them were dealing with oncology patients. And that's what changed their mind, not changed their mind, but set them on the path of actually specialising in palliative care, because they both went on to do, I think, a postgraduate diploma
at UCT.
Which is great. And they're just sort of treating those oncology. And I think the one alluded to the fact that she in the Kimberley area, there are a lot of people that travelled quite far and wide to come to the clinic or the hospital, and she realised there was a tremendous need for this, so that set them on the path.
And Annatjie, do you remember, because she said they arrived very late in their illness, in the history of the illness, which rendered them actually very difficult to treat, because now you just had to deal with the final stage, the terminal phase.
Yes, indeed. I think the fact that if you, for me, what stood out is the teamwork concept. That they come alongside the treating doctor, the family and the patient, and then together they can plan for that final phase. I think Corli said, then you put it in a box and you focus on the quality of life now.
Yes.
And that just means so much, I think, to a family assurance, just the peace of mind, that all of that's in place, and now we can enjoy each other, we can enjoy life. And then they prefer patients to be actually referred as early as possible, because then they can help them, actively treat them, where they said, like the treating doctors say, no, we can't do anything more. But they never say, we can't do anything more. They actually actively help treat symptoms and just add to quality of life. So it's just, as you say, eye-opening.
It also takes the elephant out of the room, because it makes them deal with things on practical matters. So, often things like the wills or financial issues, if the one partner has to go, what is the other partner? So many times they're left bereft with no tools of how to deal with all these things once the other spouse has gone. So I think all of that is great to go. I think that's what they were talking about, all those practicalities.
Yeah.
And
the thing is, I think, with them, being part of their everyday life, they've got so much experience with this. Whereas usually we'd find a family maybe going through that once or maybe twice throughout the lifetime.
Yeah.
And to just, benefit from their experience. And like you said, time is planning. Who is going to fulfill what role during that specific phase of the patient's life. And in terms of the whole transition, you mentioned that the whole approach, whereas the medical intervention usually looks at curing, and now we are actually moving to caring, where the quality of life question is actually, a bit different. Any impressions that you formed during that transition period? Because it's two definite chapters in a person's experience of such a terminal illness.
I got the idea that there's a lot of support from a social, or not social, a comfort point of view or a psychological point of view. They could always, as you say, they work in a multidisciplinary team, so they could call on psychologists, they call therapists of different kinds. And you've got a host of, and also, of course, your registered nurses that have also gone through this sort of thing.
And I think, makes it easier to visualize. Sometimes we have this underlying anxiety. It's actually, we want to steer clear. We don't want to think about this. And now, exploring quality of life and what that means, it actually affords us the opportunity to work through it to a certain extent, to get people involved. And, to look at, I think the most important thing was what I took away of it was the ability to manage symptoms. Because so often you find with these dreaded diseases or terminal diseases is that a lot of the quality of life goes out the window because the symptoms aren't adequately identified and treated.
Yes. I also think there's a part that is so important, is that you can then, once you said, put everything in a box, you can then treat the person as a human being. It's not all the practicalities and all the worry that you've got in the background.
I remember them saying that a treating doctor will treat the illness.
Yes.
Whereas in palliative care, they look at the person behind the illness, kind of, and it's a holistic approach of.
But it does say a lot about respect, in terms of seeing the person for who they are and respecting their story and everything that was even there prior to the diagnosis. So I mean, it's very exciting to think about it along those lines, because it does bring a lot of hope.
It does, because I think so many times the carer or the spouse is so busy with the practicalities of the issues. The women pulls, you have the person has to take it, you lose half of them and you don't know where which separator you put them in. There's all these sort of things. That's almost taken away. Maybe not altogether, but it's still, lessened.
Well, the thing is, if I listen to them, quite often the spouse or the primary treating partner would then go into automation mode. I'm there, and I'm not quite focusing on the emotional. I'm just there, I am the support, I'm the hands, the eyes, I'm the person handing out the medicine. But I was excited to find out that they actually involve the family as well with regard to feedback, because symptom management very often, I think, is underestimated because it's not observed. So I think if I think about pain, they listed quite a few. Can you remember? There was pain,
nausea, anxiety.
Anxiety.
It's all those,
And for somebody to be able to realize that these are medically treatable.
Treatable, yes.
And the relief. I mean, obviously that's where the restoration of your quality of life comes in, getting that chapter and removing the uncertainty.
And they also mentioned that patients can actually call on their GPs or treating specialists and ask, can we not involve the palliative specialists? So it's not just left to the medical staff to decide what you or when are you ready to be referred. So that was also comforting. It's kind of, you take your situation into your own hands in a sense, and not just left to the mercy of.
And as they said as well, they said they're not taking anybody's jobs. It's just different layers of support that they're bringing to the fore.
That was a beautiful image. Different layers of support.
Because they all need each other. They all give different angles of specialization.
What was also very exciting, and what I think our residents and anybody who listens to this podcast need to take note of, is the change in the number of medical aids that would actually now allow for this type of coverage. I know that initially when we started out with our subacute, we looked at the list, and at that stage you had some of the Discovery Health, the medical aids that provided for that, but as a whole, it seems like the whole community is now actually starting to come on board. They mentioned, what was it, something like...
It made scheme and Discovery. But isn't that, I think, what the problem... Not the problem is the medical aids don't always put it under palliative care. They put it under advanced illness. Or some other terminology. So it's a bit disguised, but they will a lot of the medical aids now to give it. And I think even the smaller ones, because I looked after they spoke, and they said there are only a few, but there are quite a lot. And there must be, because from a marketing perspective, if somebody's looking to medical aid, that's something that they want to know.
They mentioned that Palliative negotiates with the medical aids.
Just mention that name again. It's Palliative. And
Yes,
that's the organisation that they belong to as palliative care specialists.
Exactly, and they negotiate with the medical schemes, you know, on support. So that's also helpful to know. And I think probably any broker, you know, that you have, if you're concerned and you don't know whether you're covered or not, that's something that we can also look at. Celeste and I, you know, before we came on the air, we discussed the issue of unpacking some of the concepts that they talked about. For example, this end-of-life planning.
Yes.
What exactly is that? And I think we can perhaps do an episode on unpacking some of those things so that people know exactly what is it that they should prepare for. And that will also assist the doctors greatly, I think.
I think it would. There wasn't time for all of that. I mean, there's a lot of information given in that interview, but I think it would be very good to have another session for them just to unpack, because they're with those patients. They know. They know.
I always, in my mind, when I run out of images to share with families, I always go to the whole broker and financial planning, and do a comparison between care planning and financial planning. And I mean, this is exactly what we're talking about. Your broker being a specialist, looking at your portfolio, individually identifying what this should look like. And I think, that type of expertise, and we've got that now in both Dr. Corli and Dr. Leana. So in that sense, yes, it's very exciting.
That's exactly what a broker does, though. They end up to what you want to do, what you want to have until retirement and beyond, actually, as well. So that's exactly what you're actually looking for.
In that interview, you also, you mentioned that you bump into them in the passage and so on. So what do they do here? Can you explain a bit on that?
We can maybe just explain on that. I think the question was around the environment. Usually if they find themselves becoming involved in a process, I was interested to know, is that usually in, say for instance, a private house? Would that be comparable to some of our Groenkloof freestanding houses, as opposed to an apartment or frail care? Annatjie, I must tell you that in terms of our facility, we do palliative care anyway. And I think that the challenge is there for us to still look at the cutting edge of what's going on in palliative care. Because, regardless of our frail care, for most of our residents, well, not most, but a lot of them, that's the final chapter. So the palliative care that they receive is a principle within our frail care environment. So all along, and I know that when we started out with the frail care unit, we went for hospice training. Now again, we were privileged enough to learn from people who has the expertise to actually unpack that for us. So it's been a theme throughout. Currently, the involvement now becomes a lot closer to home, because now we can invite the families to look into those coverage, the coverage on the medical aids. And obviously, when you have people of that nature at your disposal, you can expect different results from the medical treatment. But yes, that's why we see them.
So they come as another layer of support, like you said.
Exactly.
And it's just absolutely fantastic to know that you have that specialist treatment available to Groenkloof. It's almost at a call.
I think the defining thing for me is the fact that I don't think people know that they go in when they're diagnosed with this. You wonder, sometimes it could be that they perhaps do know, but they're still accepting it, and they're not ready yet. So maybe that's.
I think some of
it, just the fact that it's a seed planted, that is available.
And the thing is, we mentioned oncology, and I don't think we should drive this home just to oncology. I think that's one of the horizons that they actually broaden, to say we are not just saying oncology here. But in the past, we must realize that the assistance and the guidance quite frequently came through the social worker that was involved in your cancer care or your oncology treatment. So again, now we are looking at a geriatric environment, and we are looking at various types of physical conditions, medical conditions. So it's not the primary oncology profile. But I think they also mentioned a lot of their referrals do still come through the social workers at the oncology centers. But I think now we are experiencing it where the more people take note of this, the more the treating doctor, the treating GP can actually determine and say, let's get this out there, let's get involved, let's get them on board with regard to facilitating this process for us.
Sure. That's the advantage, I think.
Absolutely. I think it's probably, and even it's new. I was watching that covering organisation. What was the name of it?
Palprac.
Palprac. I read that it was only started in 2018, so it's actually it's new. It's very new.
It's a growing field. It absolutely is. And again, I say a privilege to have two specialists in George area.
Fantastic.
It's such a benefit, I think, to us all.
But I did bowl them out with my international question.
Yes, you did. but typically specialists, they recover quickly
On their feet. I think that's one thing that they might hold against me. If I do invite them for a follow-up, I think it's one thing that they say, listen, you give me every question to prep on. No, but anyways, no, I had such appreciation for both of them and their personalities. I think, with the utmost confidence, one can actually recommend them in the way that they come across. They really care. And that's evident, just in terms of our little discussion with them, but our interaction when, getting to know them. And I'm very excited, to see where this leads. I think for the whole Southern Cape, people are going to take note. And
I think, I think you mentioned earlier in the interview, a growing elderly community. And to have them on board, when you look at something like specialized carer training and their input, in that, it becomes like such an equipped team to be around. That's peace of mind.
Charl, do they work at Groenkloof? Not full time, the doctors, but do they come in and consult, or how do they use them?
It's actually a consultancy in the sense that we call them per individual, and they come and they introduce their treating program and their suggestions. So it's a very individualized approach. They did mention that for both of them, a typical day would be a lot of traveling because they still go, to the various environments at which they are treating people. So in that sense, one would very much like to support them. And that's why I'm saying, I think the whole initiative for even the medical fraternity in George and in Mossel Bay, the whole Southern Cape, to take note of them and to actually support them in this way.
Yes.
Yeah.
They left us with email addresses, and they did mention that it would be that the best avenue to reach them would be through their GP or through their treating doctor. The simple reason for that is just so that they then receive all of the medical information that they need, and that makes treatment so much easier, as opposed to a patient that phones them from Groenkloof and say, I want you to come and see me. So they left the email addresses. We can perhaps repeat those email addresses if people want to refer them to their GPs. And is that, shall I just...
Yeah, I think let's just repeat those email addresses. I think both Corli and Dr. Corli and Dr. Leana left their email addresses for that reason. Yeah. So you can maybe just read it out, Annatjie.
Yeah. Dr. Leana's address is drleanaspies@gmail.com. So it reads Dr. Leana Spies @gmail.com. It's not doctor, it's the abbreviation. drleanaspies @gmail.com. And then Dr. Corli's address is drcorlimarx@outlook.com.
Celeste, any closing comments from your side? Any suggestions? Where do we go from here?
I think it would be nice to have another session with them and just ask them about the question about the international, how we
are positioned.
They have now prepared.
I think they did wing it a bit. They did say something about they think they're doing okay compared to some countries. But I think that was a bit of a wing. But it would really be interesting. I mean, we can always Google. You go to Dr. Google for anything, but it would be nice coming from them.
And especially to get their whole perception with regard to the education that they received. And how well known that is, and how it ties in with the international training centers. Yes. In terms of the latest developments, because we do find that there is a lot of new technology. I think the main thing that I'm left with is the fact that I think, you have medical science as a science, and then you get this, which I think, through experience grows into a certain art. So I think, there's something to be said for for them.
It's a science thing and the social, the social science part. So it's a combination of the both. Yeah.
And the experience actually, so that because I mean, in some ways, it is an art. You know, it's working with people at a very, very delicate phase of their lives. But yes, I'm really thoroughly excited about what we'll see. You know, and we should actually say, watch this space.
Yeah. And again, if listeners want to send in questions to us, alle dinge Groenkloof.net.
That's right.
And send us an email to that address or phone us.
Questions, comments, suggestions.
Absolutely, would be a good idea. We could post some of the questions they asked to the doctors as well. You know, so
I think let's try and do that. You know, spread the word. What you want to know,
get involved,
and get our next episode.
We'll include that email address in the description below.
Yes, I think.
And then, Annatjie, from my side, thank you very much for taking the initiative, producing this on behalf of the foundation. Yes. At some stage, we will invite the foundation again, just to come and explain to us, more exactly what the new projects that they are involved with, But in terms of the website, you might just want to mention the Groenkloof Foundation website.
That's easy to find. You can almost just type in Groenkloof Foundation and you'll find it.
Excellent.
So it's this www.groenkloof.org.za.
Celeste, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. That was a very interesting discussion. Thank you.
Yes, and thank you very much for taking part. Annatjie, duisend dankies. Ons sien mekaar by die volgende episode.
Dankie, Charl.
Thanks, Charl.
When you handed that out, I thought you're now going to write an exam. There's a page. I was almost sorry I asked him.
I think it was all the questions to me.
You went through a little bit of anxiety there, and now you realize why Corli and Dr. Leana was so caught off guard when I pitched them with that one.
It's a real bummer, you know. It's a real bummer that you did to them.
But we'll get them. I think we'll get them back. I think, Annatjie, what do you think? Will they be available for a recall?
I'm sure. I'm sure. I think it's a very good idea to actually get some questions out of the community from
I think that's a superb idea. I really do.
And then pitch those to them. So it becomes like then you get your audience involved.
Absolutely.
So I think.
And the thing is, for people, I mean, I always look at the the angle of empowering a person, to be able to give a good advice, sound advice. And, because so often we do find that in your role, even as the care representative, the portfolio holder of what would then become the board of trustees for the gardens, very often we find that the community, they would be the first ones to notice anyway. If there's a crisis with a household, they are usually the ones who pick up on that.
But I was happy to hear that you say that people outside are also listening to this, because I think if families that know, that a parent has been diagnosed with something, a daughter or a son, even if they're overseas or wherever, now know this has happened. And sit with that thing, what do I do now?
Exactly.
And I almost think like in George we need something like a database, a verified database, say one place where I now know this has happened, now I need to, who do I go to? Where do I go? Where do I ask for assistance? I think many of us go to the doctors, the GPs, or the priest or whoever, but
it's also nice to have.
But if you could have like a one verified place where there are legal consultants, there are financial planners, there are nurses, there are carers or companies that do caring or whatever. And you know that this body it's actually verified all of these people and have registered them or whatever, and so that if I go to that body, I know it's a reputable body, it's somebody that
That's
can
a nice
give me
idea. It's very
advice.
nice idea.
because it's all out there.
And it's very overwhelming.
And the thing is, there's so many new people coming in. They're not from the area, so they don't. And to find a doctor or anything like that, you go to the residence where you live. You ask your community. But it takes a while to actually establish that relationship again, and you want to know that they're actually trustworthy. What we forgot to comment on was the fact that there is a palliative program at the George Hospital. Remember they mentioned that?
Yeah, they said there was a program that rolled out a state palliative
Oh, really?
care.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's an important one.
Because there would be people that aren't on medical aid as well.
Well, let me tell you, I think for the most part, because, we do take note. I mean, once you guys move in, you supply us with your medical stuff. So I think on the whole, you'd find that a very good
I
percentage
think it's very much middle class community, so you probably would have that. So,
I don't know.
thanks, Charl, I enjoyed it. Nice.
No, let me tell you, as long as it was enjoyable, that's the main aim.
No, it has to be enjoyable. It has to be. It was great. Thank you so much.
Oh, let me tell you.